Well, hello there. Once again, this is Pastor J.D. Hatfield of the Riverside Christian Fellowship in Hernando, Florida. As always, you can find us on the web at voiceofvision.org. Ephesians 5:21 says we're to be submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. Some say this means husbands and wives must share equal authority within a marriage. But authority and submission are not the same thing, and mutual submission doesn't abolish authority structures. So Ephesians 5:21 does apply to marriage, but it needs to be explained. Mutual submission is about submitting to God by submitting to God's design for that particular relationship. In the verses following Ephesians 5:21, we see that the wife is to submit to her husband, and the husband is to serve his wife. For the wife to support her husband is to submit to God's design. For the husband to serve his wife is to submit to God's design. Godly submission carries the idea of voluntarily yielding in love. And everywhere you see a call to submission, you also see a call to service and a command to be righteous in your dealings. It's about Christians mutually serving each other and a readiness to give precedence to others. For example, the strong must not neglect the weak, and the weak must respect the strong. The rich must support the poor, and the poor must give thanks to God for the rich. In each of these, both members are exhibiting mutual submission, though in different ways. Christ and the church have a mutually submissive relationship. The church submits to the rule of Christ, and Christ served the interests of the church. You see that in Ephesians 5:25 through 27. But Ephesians 5:22 through 24, wives are explicitly told to submit to their own husbands. This command is not repeated for husbands, who are told instead to love their wives. But this, again, is mutual submission. Obedience is about our actions towards authority, while submission is about our attitude towards authority. Now, when thinking about marriage and submission, I found it extremely helpful to think of submit as support. To submit is to support. Rather than simple obedience, submission is helpful and encouraging in its approach to authority. And to serve is also to submit to God's design for your authority as a leader, which will include self-denying, sacrificial service. Women are required to submit to their husbands. But that doesn't mean the man's to rule as a tyrant or that she has no say. No. The man and the woman should be consulting one another on most everything. And many times, the husband should defer to his wife's judgment if she feels more strongly about a situation than he might. It's wise to listen to your wife, and foolish not to listen to your wife. Of course, you may have a foolish wife, or your wife may desire to do something that you know is foolish. So yes, man, you have to make that judgment call. But there are times when that call is to value her judgment of things above your own. Yes, there is submission in obeying the person in authority. But too many times, those who are called to submit, as well as those who are called to lead, see submission as one person ruling over another, instead of seeing it as one person as the quarterback, the other as the running back or receiver, etc. You see, there's the idea of submission as in being forced. And then there's the idea of submission as in allowing. Submission to each other is about lovingly and self-sacrificially yielding to and serving one another. Submission to someone else starts with submission to God. And mutual submission means for one person submitting to someone else's authority, and to the other submitting to serving someone else under your authority. This biblically based mutual submission makes for the true flourishing of freedom and virtue. It comes from a place of willing submission to God, and it's not based in an outward conformity produced by fear and force. It's a big difference here. So what is Paul saying in Ephesians 5:21 and following? The context of verse 21 is verses 18 through 20. Believers are commanded to be filled with the Spirit. And then Paul describes what that filling looks like. Speaking, singing, and making melody. That's verse 19. Giving thanks, verse 20. And submitting to each other out of a sense of awe and adoration for the Lord. That's verse 21. Still, the problem with mutual submission is that it's hard to visualize. What does that mutual submission look like in daily life? So what Paul does is illustrate it using three pairs of relationships that involve an order of authority. For wives, mutual submission looks like submitting to their own husbands as to the Lord. Ephesians 5:22 through 24. For husbands, mutual submission looks like loving their wives as their own bodies and as Christ loved the church. That's verse 25 through 33. For children, Mutual submission looks like obeying and honoring your parents. That's Ephesians 6, 1 through 3. For fathers, mutual submission looks like not provoking their children to wrath, but bringing them up in the godly nurture and instruction. 6:4. For servants, mutual submission looks like obeying sincerely. Chapter 6, verse 5 through 8. For masters, mutual submission looks like treating servants humanely and kindly. Ephesians 6:9. Ephesians 5:21 does teach mutual submission, but mutual submission doesn't overrule authority structures, and it doesn't lessen the call for service. It magnifies it. Ephesians 5:21 through 6:9 shows mutual submission within the context of authority structures. Now, getting back to marriage, in a Christian marriage, God is drawing a picture of his character, promises, and redemptive work in the world. We don't always see that represented very well, especially when it comes to this idea of submission and authority and all of that. Maybe we haven't upheld that picture very well, but it's true nonetheless. It's revealed in Ephesians 5:31 and 32, which says, Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. Friends, marriage is a portrait of the marriage of Christ to his church, which means that marriage is all about the gospel. Marriage isn't ultimately about relational fulfillment or sexual fulfillment or procreation. Now, all those wonderful things are tied up in it, but the ultimate purpose of marriage is to serve as a portrait of the eternal marriage of Christ with his bride, the church. The covenant of marriage and the marriage bed are pictures of Jesus and his covenantal faithfulness and their eternal wedded bliss. Our future and eternal hope is rooted in his unwavering faithfulness. The man leads, loves, and serves his wife because that's how Christ gave himself to his bride. And the wife respects, submits to, and helps her husband because that's how the church follows the risen Lord Jesus. Jesus and his bride cherish and adore each other. Now, in this world, a marriage isn't a perfect thing, but even the imperfections and injustices of this life still point to the power of Jesus' love. Marriage is a picture of how Jesus takes his people, an imperfect bride, and through his perfect love transforms us, culminating in our own perfection in eternity. And you see this glorious scene depicted in Revelation 19 at the eternal marriage supper of Christ and his bride. In this life, many marriages fail miserably, but the glory of marriage is a picture of the glory of the future. And looking at Philippians 2, verses 6 through 8, you see how Jesus started to woo his bride by submitting himself. Jesus submitted to God as a son, verse 6, to humanity as a servant, verse 7, and to death as a sacrifice, verse 8. Jesus submitted. Without his submission, there is no salvation. Well, there you have it. Hopefully this is going to help you think of mutual submission and submission in marriage and authority structures and what God says about it in a new and exciting and profitable, fruitful way for you. Until next time, we'll see you here, there, or in the air. God bless you.